My daughter was dying of kidney failure, and everyone insisted it was my duty as a mother to donate my kidney to save her. I was already in the operating room with the anesthesia ready to be injected when my 7-year-old grandson burst in running and screamed, "Grandma, wait!" But before I continue, make sure you are already subscribed to the channel Grandma's Revenge Tales and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love knowing how far our stories are reaching. The first time I noticed something was wrong with Emily was on a Sunday afternoon. We were having lunch at my small house in the suburbs, just as we did every weekend. The smell of pot roast filled the kitchen, mixing with the scent of lemon and herbs I had picked from my garden. Emily, my only daughter, was always my pride and joy. At 32, she was a pharmacy graduate, married to Richard, a promising doctor, and mother to little Luke, who was 7. Everything seemed perfect, until that Sunday. Emily was pale. Her eyes, usually lively and bright, like the ocean view from my kitchen window, were dull and surrounded by deep, dark circles. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to cut the meat on her plate. That was when she dropped her fork and a thin trickle of blood ran from her nose. "Honey, are you okay?" I asked, feeling my heart shrink. She wiped the blood quickly with her napkin, as if she wanted to hide the evidence of something. "I am perfectly fine, Mom. Just tired. The hospital is crazy right now." Richard, who was sitting next to her, put his hand on her shoulder with a gesture that looked protective, but today, looking back, I recognize it as possessive. "She needs to rest more," he said with that calm doctor voice. "I have been telling her." I believed them, of course. Why wouldn't I? Richard was a doctor, after all. If there was anyone who knew how to take care of my daughter, it would be him. In the weeks that followed, Emily got weaker and weaker. Her hair, once voluminous and shiny, began to fall out. Her skin took on a yellowish tone. She started canceling our Sunday lunches, saying she felt sick. When I went to visit her, Richard always seemed to be around like a watchful shadow. "She is resting now," he would say, stopping me from entering the bedroom. "Better not disturb her." It was Luke who gave me the first sign that something more serious was happening. One afternoon, when I went to pick him up from school because Richard was at a medical conference, he hugged me with unusual strength. His small arms squeezed my waist as if he feared I might disappear. "Grandma, Mommy is very sick," he whispered as we walked to the car. "She throws up every day, and Daddy gives her medicines every night, different medicines, the ones he shows to the other doctors." A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean, Luke? What different medicines?" "Medicines that are hidden in a locked box in his office. Only Daddy has the key." He looked around as if he feared being heard. Once I saw him putting a white powder in her juice. She did not see it because she was sleeping on the sofa. I tried to convince myself it was just a child's imagination. Richard was a respected doctor, specializing in nephrology. Emily was being treated by the best professionals at the hospital where they both worked, but the seed of doubt was planted, and it grew with every new symptom that appeared. 2 weeks later, I received a call from Richard. His voice was grave, loaded with a concern that sounded rehearsed. "Claire, Emily is hospitalized. Kidney failure. The tests show her kidneys are failing rapidly." The world seemed to slow down. I remember dropping the phone, my legs giving way. My daughter, my Emily, had kidney failure? How was that possible? She was always healthy. She had never had kidney problems before. When I arrived at the hospital, Emily was unrecognizable. Tubes came out of her fragile body. Machines beeped all around her. Her skin was so pale it looked translucent under the cold hospital lights. Richard was by her side, along with his parents, Anthony and Linda, people who had always looked at me with a certain poorly disguised contempt. "Claire," Richard called me, his voice smooth as velvet. "We need to talk about treatment options." It was at that moment that the idea of the transplant came up for the first time. Richard explained, with the coldness of a doctor talking about any random clinical case, that Emily would need a kidney transplant to survive. Dialysis could help for a while, but it would not be a permanent solution. "You are her mother," said Linda, Emily's mother-in-law, with that accusatory tone she always used with me. "Surely you would donate a kidney to save your only daughter, right?" I did not hesitate for a second. "Of course I will. I will do the compatibility tests immediately." What I did not know at that moment was that I was entering a web of lies and manipulation so intricate it would almost cost me my life. The look Richard exchanged with his parents, an almost imperceptible gleam of triumph, should have alerted me, but I was blind with worry for my daughter. The tests were done with surprising speed. "Perfect match," Richard announced 2 days later, holding the results like a trophy. "You are the ideal donor, Claire." Something about the way he said it bothered me. It was not gratitude or relief I saw in his eyes. It was expectation, as if he had been anxiously waiting for that specific result. It was that night, returning home after visiting Emily, that I found Luke sitting on the stairs of my apartment building. He had run away from home, crossing the 3 blocks that separated our houses alone. His eyes were red from crying so much. "Grandma," he sobbed, "I'm scared. I heard Daddy talking on the phone that after you donate the kidney, everything will be fine, that the results will be perfect." "What kind of results, Grandma?" I hugged my grandson, trying to calm him down, but his words kept echoing in my mind. What results would those be? Why did Richard seem so anxious for me to be the donor? And why did Luke seem so scared? The days that followed until the scheduled date for the surgery were a whirlwind of emotions and growing suspicions. Emily got worse every day, as if her body was being consumed from the inside. In every visit to the hospital, I found her weaker, more distant, as if she were slowly saying goodbye to life. Richard was always present, controlling who could see her, and for how long. He personally administered her medications, checking every IV bag, every pill. "I am her doctor," he justified when any nurse questioned him. "I know the case better than anyone." It was during one of those visits that I noticed something strange. While I adjusted Emily's pillow, I saw a small purple mark on her neck, similar to the one left by a needle. It was not in the place where the catheters were or where the nurses usually gave injections. It was more hidden, almost at the nape of her neck, as if someone had deliberately chosen a less visible place. "Emily, what is that on your neck?" I asked, gently touching the mark. Before she could answer, Richard entered the room, his eyes fixed instantly on the spot I was touching, and for a second, just a second, I saw panic in his gaze. "Probably irritation from the pillowcase," he answered for her, pushing my hand away with studied delicacy. "Emily has sensitive skin, she always has." Emily just nodded, her eyes avoiding mine. There was something in her look. Fear. Confusion? I could not decipher it. That night, at home, I could not sleep. The mark on Emily's neck, Richard's controlling behavior, Luke's words. Everything spun in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I could not put together. I decided to do something I never thought I would do. Investigate Richard. The next morning, I went to the hospital early before visiting hours. I knew the place well after so much coming and going. I knew that on Wednesdays, Richard had a meeting with the medical team at 9 in the morning. It would be my chance to see Emily's medical history without his interference. The head nurse, Mrs. Higgins, was always kind to me. She had worked at the hospital for over 30 years and had known Emily since she started doing her internship there during college. "Claire," she greeted me with surprise, "you came early today." "Mrs. Higgins, I need your help," I confessed, feeling the weight of the decision I was making. "Something is wrong with my daughter's treatment. I need to see her medical records." Mrs. Higgins hesitated. "Claire, you know that is against the rules." Please, I begged, holding her hands. I have reasons to believe my daughter is being harmed, and the transplant is scheduled for next week. I need to know what is happening before I donate my kidney. Something in my desperation must have convinced Mrs. Higgins. She looked around, making sure no one was watching us, and led me to a small room. I have access to the system. I can show you the tests, but we have to be quick. What I saw in Emily's medical records left me frozen. Her tests showed elevated levels of substances that I, even without profound medical knowledge, knew should not be present in anyone's blood. Even more alarming, there were discrepancies between the official tests and some handwritten notes by another doctor, Dr. Michael Sanders. "Who is this Dr. Michael?" I asked Mrs. Higgins. "He is also a nephrologist, a colleague of Richard. He was following Emily's case at the beginning, but Richard insisted on taking it over alone." Mrs. Higgins frowned. It was strange, because Dr. Michael is considered one of the best kidney specialists in the state. In Dr. Michael's notes, I read, "Suspected heavy metal poisoning. Recommend full toxicological investigation." My blood froze. Poisoning? Was my daughter being poisoned? "There is one more thing, Claire," said Mrs. Higgins, lowering her voice even more. "Richard is conducting research on a new drug for transplant rejection. It is experimental. It has not been approved yet. I heard rumors that he needs data from real cases to get approval and funding." Luke's words echoed in my mind. "After you donate the kidney, the results will be perfect." I left the hospital stunned, with a terrible certainty growing inside me. Richard was deliberately making Emily sick to use her as a guinea pig in his research, and I would be the next victim, providing the kidney he needed to complete his macabre experiment. But I needed concrete proof. I could not simply accuse the respected Dr. Richard Miller without solid evidence. And, most importantly, I needed to find a way to protect Emily. That was when I decided to look for Dr. Michael Sanders. If anyone could confirm my suspicions, it would be him. I found him at his private practice at the end of that same day. He was a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a grave expression. "Claire," he said after I explained the situation, "I have been following Emily's process from a distance, and I must say your suspicions are not unfounded. Her symptoms are compatible with chronic mercury or arsenic poisoning, but Richard vetoed all the toxicological tests I requested." "Why? Why would he do that to his own wife?" Dr. Michael hesitated. "There are rumors at the hospital. Richard is desperate for results for his research, a new anti-rejection drug that promises to revolutionize transplants. But he needs clinical data from real cases, and a mother-daughter transplant with perfect compatibility would be the ideal scenario to test his drug." "Oh my God," I murmured, feeling the ground disappear beneath my feet. "Is he poisoning his own wife so he can test her as a guinea pig? And he wants to use my kidney too? I cannot state it categorically without the proper tests, but—" Dr. Michael looked at me with compassion. "I believe so. And if you donate your kidney under these circumstances, you will also be putting yourself at risk." I left the office with my mind boiling. I needed to act quickly. The surgery was scheduled for 4 days from now. 4 days to gather evidence, convince the authorities, and save my daughter and myself from a doctor willing to sacrifice lives in the name of science and ambition. That night was the longest of my life. Sitting alone in the kitchen with only the dim light over the table illuminating my gloomy thoughts, I tried to organize a plan. Dr. Michael's words still echoed in my head. "Richard is using both of you as guinea pigs. How did I not realize it before?" The signs were all there. The sudden onset of Emily's illness, Richard's obsessive control over her treatment, the almost desperate insistence for me to be the donor, the injection marks in unusual places. Everything pointed to a monstrous truth that I, blinded by respect for the medical profession and trust in my son-in-law, could not see. I needed proof. Accusations against a respected doctor like Richard would demand concrete evidence, and I only had 4 days until the surgery. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was almost midnight. Who could it be? I opened it cautiously to find Luke, my little grandson, shivering from cold on the threshold. His eyes were red from crying, and he held his dinosaur backpack tightly against his chest. "Luke, what are you doing here at this hour? How did you get here?" "I came on the bus, Grandma," he sobbed, coming in and hugging my legs. "Daddy said I cannot see you anymore until after the surgery. He got mad when I talked about the special medicines he gives Mommy." My heart raced. "What special medicines, sweetie?" Luke opened the backpack and took out a small amber glass bottle with no label. "He puts this in her juice, and in the food sometimes. When I asked what it was, he said it was a vitamin, but I saw him hiding it in the safe when other people arrive." I took the bottle with trembling hands. It contained a whitish powder that could really pass for a vitamin or supplement to untrained eyes. But instinctively, I knew I was holding the proof of Richard's crime. "Luke, how did you get this?" "I took it from the safe. I know the code because I saw Daddy typing it once. It is his birthday backwards." Luke seemed proud of his little espionage. "There are more things in the safe, Grandma. Notebooks full of numbers and charts, and photos of Mommy sleeping with needles in her arm." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Luke, you are very brave, but your father must be worried. I am going to call him and—" "No!" Luke shouted, grabbing my arm with surprising strength. "He will know I took the medicine. He said if I told anyone about the special medicines, Mommy would never get better." At that moment, I made my decision. Luke would stay with me tonight. Tomorrow, I would take the bottle to be analyzed and seek legal help. I could no longer trust Richard, nor could I allow Luke to return home while I did not fully understand what was happening. I called Richard with an excuse. I said Luke had come to visit me because he was worried about his mother and had fallen asleep. It would be better to let him spend the night. Richard did not seem suspicious, perhaps too confident in his plan to imagine that a 7-year-old child could be a threat. The next morning, I got up early and took the bottle to a private lab, claiming I had found the substance in my grandson's room and was worried it might be drugs. I paid extra for the urgency of the results. While I waited, I looked for Dr. Charles Evans' office. He was an old friend of the family who now worked as the Director of Medical Ethics at the Regional Board. If there was anyone who could help me navigate this nightmare, it would be him. Dr. Charles listened to me with growing attention, his face hardening as I narrated my suspicions. When I finished, he remained silent for a few moments, as if processing the magnitude of the accusations. "Claire, what you are describing is extremely serious. If it is true, we are talking about multiple crimes: attempted murder, illegal human experimentation, medical fraud." He sighed deeply. "I know Richard. I always considered him brilliant, perhaps too ambitious, but I never imagined something like this." "I need your help, Charles. The surgery is scheduled for 3 days from now. If we go into that operating room, I do not know if Emily and I will come out alive." Dr. Charles nodded gravely. "I am going to contact some people. We need the results from that bottle and a court order to access all of Emily's medical records, including Richard's private notes. We also need authorization for independent toxicological tests on Emily. And what about Luke? I cannot let him go back to Richard's house. For now, keep him with you. If we confirm your suspicions, we will file a request for provisional custody, alleging imminent risk." When I left Dr. Charles' office, I received a call from the lab. The preliminary results were ready. The bottle contained a mixture of compounds, including significant amounts of mercury salts, a substance known to cause progressive kidney damage when administered chronically. The confirmation was like a punch in the stomach. As much as I suspected it, a part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was some less monstrous alternative explanation. But now I had the chemical proof. Richard was deliberately poisoning my daughter. With trembling hands, I called Dr. Charles to inform him of the results. His response was immediate. "I am contacting the police and the hospital ethics committee. Do not get close to Richard. Go home and wait for my call. I'd barely hung up when my cell phone rang again. It was Linda, Richard's mother. Claire. Her voice sounded irritatingly calm. We are all worried. Luke is with you, and Richard says you have been asking strange questions at the hospital. This is no time for paranoia, Claire. Your daughter needs that transplant. Something in her tone, a calculated falseness, confirmed my worst suspicions. They knew, all of them. Richard, his parents, they were involved in this horrible plan. Linda, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I know exactly what is going on, and I can guarantee you that you, your son, and your husband are going to pay for every drop of suffering you caused my daughter. There was a brief silence. When Linda spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of cordiality. You have no idea who you are messing with, Claire. Hand over Luke and show up for the surgery, or Emily will suffer the consequences. Accidents happen in hospitals all the time. She hung up before I could answer. The icy fear I felt was quickly replaced by a fury I had never experienced before. Not only were they threatening my life, but they were threatening to kill my daughter if I did not cooperate. The race against time had begun, and the stakes could not be higher. The next 2 days were a blur of anxiety and frantic action. Dr. Charles, true to his word, mobilized a small task force of trusted professionals. A district attorney specialized in medical crimes named Vanessa Cole, 2 investigators, and an independent nephrologist to review Emily's case. The bottle Luke brought was the key that opened all the doors. The full analysis confirmed it. It contained a toxic mixture of mercury salts and other nephrotoxic substances in doses low enough to cause gradual damage, but not immediately lethal. The perfect type of poison for someone who wants to simulate a progressive disease. With this evidence, we got a court order to access Richard's private office at the hospital and Emily's complete records. What we found there was even more disturbing than we imagined. In a safe hidden behind a bookshelf, opened with the same code Luke had mentioned, we discovered meticulously kept notebooks documenting the experiment. Richard had recorded every dose administered to Emily, every alteration in her blood tests, every new symptom. Charts showed the progressive deterioration of her kidney function over months. There were even photographs of her unconscious, with visible injection marks. But the most shocking thing was a dossier on me. Richard had gathered my previous medical records, calculated the compatibility of our tissues, and detailed exactly how the experiment would continue after the transplant. He intended to administer his unapproved experimental drug in increasing doses, testing the limits of Emily's body's capacity to accept my kidney under the influence of the drug. In a printed email found in the same folder, Richard wrote to a representative of a large pharmaceutical company. With the data from this case, we will have enough evidence to advance to Phase 3 trials. A mother-daughter match is the ideal scenario, genetically close enough to minimize natural rejection, but different enough to test the full efficacy of the compound Formula X. At the end of the email, a value: $5 million. The price of my daughter's life. The price of my life. District Attorney Vanessa Cole looked through the documents with a grave expression. This is a clear case of attempted aggravated murder, illegal human experimentation, falsification of medical records, and medical corruption. We have enough evidence to arrest Richard Miller and everyone involved immediately. And what about Emily? I asked, feeling a mixture of relief for having the proof and terror for my daughter's state. She is still at the hospital under his care. We will transfer her to another hospital today, Dr. Charles guaranteed. I already contacted the university hospital. They are preparing a team to receive her. Dr. Michael Sanders will take over the case. An operation was carefully planned. The police would arrest Richard at his office, while a specialized ambulance would transfer Emily. Everything had to happen simultaneously to prevent Richard or his accomplices from interfering, or worse, carrying out the threat to cause an accident. The morning of the operation, I was a bundle of nerves. Luke stayed with a specially assigned social worker in a safe place. I would accompany Emily's transfer, along with Dr. Michael and a trusted nurse. I arrived at the hospital at 9 in the morning as instructed. District Attorney Cole assured me that the police were already positioned, waiting only for the signal to act. Everything seemed to be going according to plan until I entered Emily's room and found it empty. My heart stopped. I ran to the nursing station, where a young woman I had never seen before was checking the computer. My daughter, Emily Miller, should be in room 507. Where is she? The nurse typed something and frowned. She was transferred to the surgical wing an hour ago. According to the system, Dr. Miller moved up the transplant procedure. The world went dark around me. Richard had discovered our plan and moved up the surgery. He was going to perform the transplant anyway, with or without my consent. And if he could not use my kidney, who would be the donor? I grabbed my cell phone and frantically called Vanessa Cole. "He found out!" I screamed as soon as she answered. "Richard moved up the surgery. Emily is already in the operating room." "We are on our way," she replied tensely. "Do not do anything. Wait for the police." But I could not wait. My daughter was in the hands of a man who had systematically poisoned her for months, a man who saw her body only as a vessel for his experiments, a man who was willing to sacrifice 2 lives for the advancement of his career. I knew the hospital well. I knew where the surgical center was and how to get there. What I did not know was how to enter the operating room or what I would do when I arrived, but I had to try. I ran down the hallways, ignoring the surprised looks and questions from the staff. When I reached the entrance of the surgical center, I was stopped by a security guard. "Ma'am, you cannot enter without authorization." "My daughter is in there," I shouted, trying to get past him. "She is in danger." The guard held me by the arms. "Calm down. I am going to check on your daughter." "What is her name?" "Emily Miller. She is being operated on by Dr. Richard Miller. Please, you do not understand. He is going to kill her." The man looked at me like I was crazy, but something in my desperation must have moved him. He asked me to wait and went into the surgical center. Those were the longest minutes of my life. Every second that passed was a second Richard could be closer to completing his diabolical plan. My hands were shaking. My heart beat so hard I thought it would explode in my chest. Finally, the guard returned with a confused expression. "Ma'am, there is a surgery in room 3, but it is not a transplant. Dr. Miller is performing a kidney biopsy on the patient Emily Miller." Biopsy? Why would Richard do a biopsy now, when he had already diagnosed terminal kidney failure? Unless... The answer hit me like lightning. He was trying to manufacture evidence. Realizing he was being investigated, Richard was creating proof to support his false diagnosis. If anyone questioned the need for the transplant, he would point to the biopsy results that he would undoubtedly manipulate to prove his false theory. He was desperately trying to ensure his story held up, even with all the evidence against him starting to pile up. The biopsy, of course. Richard was desperately trying to create false evidence to sustain his lie. If I reported him, he would show the biopsy results as proof that Emily really suffered from kidney failure, a last desperate move of a cornered man. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down," the guard was saying, his voice distant as if coming from another world. "The police are on their way." "Police? Oh, yes. Vanessa Cole must have contacted the authorities. But what if they arrived too late? What if Richard had already completed his procedure? It was at that moment that I saw Luke running down the hall, followed closely by a woman I recognized as the social worker who was supposed to be watching him. How had he escaped? How had he gotten here? "Grandma!" he shouted, running into my arms. "They are going to hurt Mommy. I heard Grandpa Anthony talking on the phone that they had to finish the job today." I felt my blood freeze. "Luke, how did you get here?" "I ran away when the lady went to the bathroom. I took a taxi. I said my mom was in the hospital." His eyes shone with determination and fear. "Grandma, there is one more thing. I brought this." He took something out of his pocket, a small digital recorder, the kind lawyers and journalists use. I recorded Daddy talking to Grandpa last night. They did not know I was listening. With trembling hands, I pressed the play button. Richard's voice filled the hallway, low but perfectly clear. "Move up the surgery," she suspects. "We cannot risk it. The funding depends on these results." "No, we are not going to use her kidney. I got a compatible donor. Yes, that terminal patient on the 3rd floor. I offered his family a considerable amount. No one will know. When we finish, no one will believe her story." The recording continued, but I had heard enough. Richard planned to use the kidney of another patient, probably someone vulnerable, whose family he had bribed to continue his macabre experiment. And then, when it was all done, who would believe the accusations of an older woman against a respected doctor? The guard, who had heard the recording next to me, was pale. "Oh my God," he murmured, grabbing his radio. "Code red in the surgical center. I repeat, code red in the surgical center." Less than a minute later, we heard sirens. The police had arrived. District Attorney Cole ran ahead of 4 uniformed officers, followed by Dr. Charles and Dr. Michael. "Claire!" Vanessa exclaimed. "We found Richard's parents trying to destroy documents in his office. They are in custody. Where is Emily?" "Surgery room 3. Richard is performing a biopsy on her right now, but listen to this first." I played the recording again. Vanessa's face hardened with every word. When it finished, she turned to the officers. "Go in immediately. We have evidence of a crime in progress." It was like watching a movie scene. The police, accompanied by Dr. Michael and the security guard, burst into the surgical center. I wanted to follow them, but Vanessa held me back. "Claire, let them handle it. You have done enough. Now you need to be strong for Emily." The wait was agonizing. Luke grabbed my hand, his small fingers squeezing mine with surprising strength. I could feel his trembling, but also his bravery. This little boy had risked everything to save his mother and his grandmother. Finally, the doors opened. A gurney was pushed out quickly, with Emily still unconscious, connected to monitors. Dr. Michael came by her side, checking her vitals. "She is stable," he assured me quickly. "We interrupted the procedure in time. We are transferring her to the university hospital immediately for detox and proper treatment." Behind them, Richard was being escorted by 2 officers, handcuffed, his white coat contrasting brutally with the metal cuffs on his wrists. His face, always so serene and confident, was now distorted by a mixture of rage and fear. When he passed by me, our gazes met. There was no remorse in his eyes, only fury for having been discovered because his plan had failed. "You do not understand," he hissed. "It was for science. Medical advancement demands sacrifices." "Not when the sacrifice is my daughter," I replied, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. An officer pushed him forward, cutting off any response he might have had. Dr. Charles approached, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Claire, you were amazing. You saved Emily's life. Now let's take care of her. Detox will take time, but Dr. Michael believes the recovery will be complete. The damage to the kidneys is not irreversible yet." I looked at Emily on the gurney, so pale and fragile, and then at Luke, whose eyes did not leave his mother's face. A wave of exhaustion hit me, as if all the adrenaline of the last few weeks was suddenly leaving my body. "Let's go," I said, taking Luke's hand. "Let's go with your mom to the hospital." In the ambulance, holding Emily's lifeless hand while the paramedics monitored her vitals, I allowed myself to cry for the first time. Not tears of sadness or fear, but of relief and gratitude. We had discovered the truth in time. Emily was alive, Luke was safe, and Richard and his accomplices would face justice. Looking at my daughter's face, I promised silently that, from that moment on, no one would ever harm her again, not her nor my grandson. This family had been torn apart by the greed and cruelty of one man, but now we would have the chance to rebuild it, based on love and truth. The road to recovery would be long, but for the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel hope. The days that followed Richard's arrest were a whirlwind of emotions, medical procedures, and legal statements. Emily was transferred to the University Hospital, where Dr. Michael personally took over her case. The toxicological tests confirmed alarming levels of mercury and other heavy metals in her system, which required an intensive chelation treatment to eliminate the toxins. I stayed by her side day and night, watching every drop of medication, questioning every procedure. The trust I had blindly placed in medicine had been shattered, and now I had become vigilant even with the most well-intentioned professionals. Dr. Michael, understanding my trauma, explained each stage of the treatment patiently, showing me the test results, allowing me to verify the medications. "Trust is broken, Claire," he would tell me with kindness. "We need to rebuild it little by little." Luke was also always present, sitting quietly in a corner of the room, drawing or reading, but always with his eyes attentive to any movement around his mother. The boy, who was previously vibrant and chatty, had now become silent and observant, as if he had aged years in a few days. In the second week of hospitalization, when Emily finally began to show consistent signs of improvement, we had a difficult conversation. She was sitting in bed, still weak, but with eyes clearer than I had seen in months. Her hands no longer trembled as much, and a slight color had returned to her cheeks. "Mom," she said softly, "they told me everything. About Richard, about the poisoning, about how you and Luke saved me." Her voice cracked. How did I not realize? How could I be so blind? I held her hands, feeling the fragility of the bones under the skin. "Do not blame yourself, honey. Richard was your husband, a respected doctor. We all trusted him." "But I am a pharmacist," she insisted, tears running silently. "I should have recognized the symptoms, questioned the medications. Instead, I let him convince me that I was becoming paranoid, that stress was affecting my perception. It was a classic pattern of abuse," the psychologist who started treating Emily explained later. Richard had methodically built a system of isolation and gaslighting, first convincing Emily that her symptoms were psychosomatic, then gradually distancing her from friends and work colleagues with the excuse that she needed to rest. Finally, controlling her medication and food, keeping her in a constant state of confusion and vulnerability. "People like Richard are sophisticated predators," explained Dr. Louisa, the psychologist. "They choose intelligent and strong victims because the challenge is greater and the victory more satisfying." Emily was not a victim because she was weak, but because she trusted someone who did not deserve that trust. The police investigation revealed the full extent of Richard's scheme. For almost 2 years, he had been conducting unauthorized experiments with an experimental anti-rejection drug developed by himself. He had started testing it on terminal patients, offering the drug as compassionate treatment without explaining the true risks or obtaining the proper ethical approval. When he obtained promising preliminary results, a large international pharmaceutical company showed interest, but demanded more solid data from cases with high genetic compatibility, like siblings or parents and children. That was when Richard turned his gaze toward his own family. Emily's choice was not accidental. As a pharmacist, she would understand and value the importance of medical research. As a devoted wife, she would trust him implicitly. And as my daughter, she shared with me a genetic compatibility high enough to be an ideal donor, but with enough differences to properly test the efficacy of the drug. Richard's parents, Anthony and Linda, were fully involved in the scheme. Business people with connections in the pharmaceutical world, they had facilitated contact with the multinational corporation and managed the financial aspect of the operation. The $5 million mentioned in the email were just the beginning. If the drug was approved, the Miller family would receive royalties that could reach hundreds of millions over the years. They sold the health of their own daughter-in-law and the future of their own grandson for money, commented District Attorney Vanessa Cole during one of our many meetings to prepare the court case. In 20 years as a prosecutor, few cases have disgusted me as much as this one. The trial of Richard and his parents became one of the most talked about cases in the media. Dr. Poison's wife to use mother-in-law as guinea pig in illegal experiment. The headlines did not spare the sensationalism, but the reality was even more disturbing than any title could capture. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Emily continued her slow recovery. Fortunately, the damage to her kidneys was not irreversible. With the end of the poisoning and the proper treatment, her kidney function began to improve gradually. Dr. Michael guaranteed us that, although it could take months or even years for a full recovery, Emily would not need a transplant or permanent dialysis. The emotional damage, however, was another story. How do you rebuild a life when you discover that the person you trusted most, your husband, the father of your child, tried to kill you slowly day after day, year after year? Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, Emily confided in me once, when Luke had finally fallen asleep on the hospital room sofa. And for a second, I forget everything. Then, reality comes back like an avalanche. And do you know what is the worst part, Mom? It is not the betrayal or the fear of death. It is thinking about all the little kindnesses, the moments of affection that I now know were fake, when he brought me tea to help with the symptoms, knowing he was poisoning me. When he dried my tears after I threw up for hours, pretending concern while internally celebrating the progress of his experiment. I had no adequate words of comfort. How could I have them? Instead, I held her hand and listened, allowing her to navigate the labyrinth of her pain with the only flashlight available, the raw and undeniable truth of what had happened. Luke, in his quiet and attentive way, was also processing the trauma. The child psychologist who started treating him explained that he was dealing with a complex form of grief, not for the physical death of his father, but for the death of the image he had of him. He is wondering if he was ever really loved, explained Dr. Marcia, no relation to the paternal grandmother, fortunately. If his father would have sacrificed him too, if it were necessary. These are questions for which we do not have answers, and with which he will have to learn to live. One afternoon, I found Luke alone in the hospital hallway, looking out the window towards the courtyard where other children were playing. "Grandma," he said without turning around, "when Mommy gets better, can we go live at your house?" "Of course, my love. You can stay with me as long as you want." He nodded, still looking outside. "I think it would be safer. I could take care of both of you." My heart broke a little more. Only 7 years old, and Luke had already assumed the role of protector of the family. I hugged him from behind, resting my chin on his soft hair that smelled of children's shampoo. "You already protected us, Luke. You were the bravest hero I have ever known. But now, let your mom and me take care of you for a while, okay?" Then he turned, burying his face in my blouse, and finally cried, not the held-back tears from before, but deep sobs that shook his small body. I let him cry, knowing that every tear was a necessary step on the long road of healing we had ahead. 3 months after hospitalization, Emily finally was discharged. My house, which previously seemed so small for just me, now housed 3 generations united by trauma, but also by the determination to rebuild our lives from the rubble left by Richard. It has been a year since that fateful day in the operating room. Today, sitting on the porch of our new house, a small farmhouse on the outskirts of the city, far from the hospital, far from the memories, I watch Emily and Luke playing in the newly planted garden. She still has bad days, when fatigue dominates her or when tests show some fluctuation in kidney values, but they are increasingly rare. Richard's trial ended 2 months ago. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for attempted aggravated murder, causing grievous bodily harm, illegal practice of medicine, and several other crimes. His parents received lesser sentences, but equally significant as accomplices. Richard's medical license was permanently revoked, and his name now appears on lists of disqualified doctors worldwide. The pharmaceutical company that would fund the research faced a multi-million-dollar lawsuit and a devastating image crisis when emails came to light suggesting that some executives knew, or should have known, that Richard's data was obtained by unethical means. Millions of dollars were allocated to a fund for victims of unethical medical experimentation, and new regulations were proposed to prevent similar cases. But none of that gave Luke his innocence back or erased the invisible scars we all carry. Emily decided not to go back to pharmacy. Instead, she started a law degree, determined to specialize in medical crimes and bioethics. "I want to make sure other families do not go through what we went through," she told me when enrolling. "I want to turn our pain into something useful." Luke, now 8 years old, returned to school after months of homeschooling. The first days were difficult. The other children knew fragments of the story through parents who followed the case in the media. Some asked insensitive questions. Others kept their distance, as if trauma were contagious. But slowly he began to find his place again, forming new friendships, reconnecting with the world. And me, I discovered a strength I did not know I possessed. At 57, I became an activist for patient rights. I started speaking in small support groups, sharing our story. Soon I was giving lectures at medical and nursing schools, reminding future health professionals that behind every medical record there is a person, a family, a story. The trust between doctor and patient is sacred, I always emphasize in these lectures. When that trust is betrayed, it is not just an individual who suffers, but the entire social fabric that keeps our health system working. At one of those conferences, I met Robert, a retired doctor whose son had been the victim of a medical error years before. We started as activism colleagues, then friends, and now, well, we are rediscovering together what it means to trust again. There are days, like today, when I can almost forget. Days when Emily's laughter in the garden sounds so light and genuine that it seems impossible she went through hell. Days when I see Luke absorbed in his books or games, showing glimpses of the carefree child he was before. But then the night comes, and with it, the nightmares. Emily still wakes up screaming sometimes, convinced they are poisoning her again. Luke still obsessively checks his mother's food and medicines, a ritual we are trying gently to help him overcome with therapy. And me? I still relive that moment in the operating room, the cold of the steel table under my back, the blinding brightness of the surgical lights, the feeling of complete helplessness while I waited for the anesthesia to be injected, believing I was about to donate a kidney to save my daughter, without knowing I was handing myself over to a macabre experiment. And then, like a ray of light breaking through the darkness, the image of Luke bursting into the room, small but determined, carrying the truth that would save us. Dr. Charles told me once, during one of our many conversations after the incident, "Claire, you three are survivors not only of a crime, but of a fundamental betrayal of human trust. Recovery will not be linear. There will be relapses, bad days, moments of despair, but there will also be healing, renewed connection, and eventually a new normal." He was right. Our new normal is not perfect. It is fragile, built carefully on the rubble of what we lost, but it is ours, one with tears, courage, and a fierce determination not to allow the evil of one man to define the rest of our lives. This afternoon, as I watch Emily teaching Luke to plant sunflower seeds, they always turn toward the sun, no matter how cloudy the day is, she explains to him. I feel a peace I thought I would never experience again. The seeds are planted in soil, fertilized by the ashes of our past, and like the sunflowers, we are learning to turn toward the light, even on the darkest days. The phone rings, interrupting my thoughts. It is District Attorney Vanessa Cole. "Claire, I have news. Richard's appeal was denied. The sentence was upheld in full." I sigh deeply. A weight I did not even know I was carrying finally dissipates. "Thank you for letting me know, Vanessa. How are you guys?" I look back at the garden, at my daughter and my grandson, their hands in the dirt planting the future. "We are growing sunflowers," I answer simply. She understands. After everything we shared during the case, she always understands. When I hang up, Emily looks at me inquisitively. I tell her about the appeal decision. She nods, her face a complex mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, a shadow of something that could be regret for what could have been in another life, with another man. "Let's plant more sunflowers," she says finally, "one for every day we survived." Luke, absorbed in his task, does not seem to notice our conversation. He is too busy creating life from small seeds, demonstrating a faith in the future that only children can maintain even after knowing the worst of humanity. I join them in the garden, kneeling on the soft earth despite the protests of my joints. I plant my own row of seeds, thinking of all the women and children who suffered similar medical abuses, but who were not lucky enough to have a Luke to save them at the last minute. "For them," I murmur as I cover the seeds with soil, "so that their stories are also heard." Emily touches my shoulder gently. "They will be, Mom. We will make sure they are." And in this small garden, with hands in the dirt and faces turned toward the sun, we continue our path of healing, imperfect, sometimes painful, but deeply ours. Free, finally, to choose our own path, write our own story, plant our own seeds of hope. And when the sunflowers finally bloom, they will be a vibrant and unbreakable testament that even from the darkest circumstances, life, light, and love can be reborn. Now, if you like this story, click on this next video appearing on the screen, because in it there is a story of betrayal and a twist like you have never seen before.